As my old school viewers would know, Nintendo used to be my number one largest stock in my entire portfolio, but after more than tripling my profits on it, I did eventually sell completely out of it and have never purchased any shares since then. Well, I was recently thinking what video should I make next for you guys, and I thought, why not do something a little nostalgic and go back and take a look at Nintendo and give an update on the stock. After all, a lot of things have actually changed since I used to personally own it myself. For example, you have the Switch on track to become the best-selling game console of all time. Their video games are still extremely popular to this day. You of course had the Pokemon card craze where they were selling like crazy during the pandemic. You have Nintendo expanding into theme parks and movies. There's so many things going on with Nintendo as a business, and yet their stock has actually crashed by around 35% from its highs. So is the stock a buy on this dip, and what are my updated thoughts on Nintendo stock as a long-term investment? Let's talk about it. What's up everyone, my name is Ale. Welcome back to my world of stocks. Let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's talk about why the stock has been falling, and I'll also give my thoughts on where I think they're headed in the future as well. Okay, now the first thing that you need to understand about Nintendo stock is that, at least historically speaking, it's always been very cyclical, and it's been dependent on the success of their game consoles, which is what their entire business is really centered around. For example, the Nintendo GameCube released in 2001, and while it did go down as a very nostalgic and beloved console among Nintendo fans, the fact is that it didn't actually sell very well at only around 21 million units, which ranks it all the way down at the number 21 spot among all-time sales for game consoles. And as a result, Nintendo stock actually fell and struggled for years until around 2006 when the Nintendo Wii was released, which that sent the stock skyrocketing to nearly $80 a share because of its massive popularity, selling more than 100 million units, which makes it the 7th best-selling console of all time. And it's like the 4th best-selling if you only count home consoles. From there, though, things got cyclical once again. Of course, there was the overall crash of the Great Recession, but to make matters worse, Nintendo's follow-up console called the Wii U confused customers with its name, and it had a weird design that included a portable screen, but you still actually needed to be in range of the home consoles. So a lot of customers, and especially parents that were buying this for their kids, they were just too confused with the console. They didn't know what to make of it. And ultimately, the console ended up being a complete failure, only selling even fewer units than the GameCube at around 13 million. Because of this, Nintendo stock continued to struggle for years until it finally was announced that they were developing a new hybrid type of console called the Switch. And this console allowed users to play either on a big screen TV or take it portably on the go wherever they want. And they weren't tied to the home console at all. And that's when I immediately started to buy the stock myself by huge amounts, because I knew that this hybrid console would attract gamers from multiple sides of the market. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, as the Switch released in 2017 and already went on to break north of 100 million units, with it currently sitting in the number 5 spot, even ahead of the original Wii, which was, back then it was the best-selling Nintendo home console of all time. And as a result, the stock skyrocketed to a brand new record high of over $80 a share. Since then, though, it's been about 5 years now since the launch of the Switch, and the cyclicality has started to creep back into the stock, as investors are worried that sales will start to decline now, just like they have throughout history. And thus, Nintendo stock has started to crash, also because of the broader market and the economy and different things too. But I'm just kind of generalizing here. Now, I'll zoom into the past 5 years so you can get a better look at this. And what you're essentially talking about here is a 35% crash from its highs, with it currently sitting right near the bottom of its 52-week range as well. And that's essentially where we are today. Now, many would argue that this fear is warranted in the stock, but others would argue that Nintendo has been making a lot of changes to end the cyclicality and diversify their business quite a lot. So let's quickly cover both of those arguments, and I'll share my thoughts on it too. Now, in terms of what Nintendo is doing to diversify and refresh things, well, they actually try to refresh the Switch line rather than having to put out a brand new, whole console generation. but they did this by launching the cheaper and smaller Switch Lite that can only be played portably. And later on, they ended up launching the Switch OLED that is more expensive but upgrades the screen to a larger and better looking OLED panel. And these upgrades are helping the Switch continue to sell despite already being over 100 million units and just around 40 million shy from beating the PlayStation 2 to become the best-selling console of all time, which by the way, this fiscal year, Nintendo is still estimating another 20 million Switch units being sold. So at this rate, I think it may only be a couple more years until we see the Switch take that #1 spot of all time. Despite that success though, I do actually still think that an entire new console generation is going to be needed fairly soon from Nintendo, because that huge user base of gamers that they have, it includes many gamers like myself that purchased the original Switch and are still not willing to upgrade until we get something that is more meaningfully powerful, that can play bigger and better games, and a better reason to spend, $350 to upgrade. Thankfully, it does seem like something like that is coming, but it may still be a couple years out since most rumors and leaks are pointing to a 2024 release window. Now, the newest of which of these rumors comes from a fairly large and reputable firm called Ampere Analysis, and they released their latest report on Nintendo recently, and based on their research, they estimate that a new console would likely come in 2024, but that sales will inevitably decline for the Switch until that date. Now, they stated that the Switch sales, setting aside the unexpectedly strong growth in 2020 due to the pandemic, are following a traditional console life cycle shape. Now, they say even with the release of the OLED model, sales are still expected to decline from their peak as the Switch reaches year 6 of its cycle in 2023, and Nintendo's latest shipments forecast reflects this, since Nintendo has forecast 21 million Switch shipments for the next year, which is down from 23 million the prior year. Although they also noted that these estimates may be conservative depending on upcoming game releases that could, lift up sales. But overall, the point is that things will likely decline from here. And yeah, I gotta say that I mostly agree with this. If you look at upcoming projections from analysts, we know that Nintendo already had huge growth in sales in 2019 at 14%, while also exploding in 2020 because of the pandemic at over 30%. But then in 2021, things started correcting back down with a 10% decline, and now this year is expected to be flat, while next year is also expected to decline yet again by about 5%. Now, to be fair, the pandemic boosted their sales by a huge amount, so things did need to correct back down for a while. And meanwhile, Nintendo has done a great job of diversifying with software sales and by growing their player base. For example, there are now 14 Switch games that have sold more than 10 million units each, which is huge. Some of them even above 20 million, over 30 million, and even 40 million. And even with the heavy decline in revenue, their annual user base number has actually continued to climb, and it broke north of 100 million last quarter. Their online subscription service has also grown to over 30 million paid users, which is bringing in recurring revenue, something that they used to not collect before. And they're also expanding their theme parks internationally, with already one in their home country of Japan, but soon in California and Florida too. They've been making movies including Pokemon with Ryan Reynolds and Mario with Chris Pratt. And speaking of Pokemon, Nintendo also owns a third of the entire Pokemon brand, which saw a huge explosion in popularity during the lockdowns, which helped boost their trading card sales by over 50% last year, while all other parts of their business actually saw declines. But ultimately, the problem is that these are not big enough parts of their business to make up for struggling console sales that are going to need a new generation more and more as time goes on. And even with the 35% crash, I would say that the stock is still fairly valued at this point, not really undervalued. I mean, PE wise, at around 14, they are about 20% cheaper than the sector, but when you factor in the future growth, or in this case, the lack of growth, well, their valuation on a PEG basis is actually more than 100% more expensive. Even compared to themselves, you get that same kind of mixture. It's somewhere like in the middle. That's why I say it's fairly valued. Yes, it's definitely much cheaper than their pandemic-fueled 5-year average, but it's still higher than their 10-year average, higher than their 15-year average, and higher than their 20-year average as well. So with that mixture and knowing all the good things that Nintendo is doing to diversify, but still the heavy reliance that they have on the Nintendo Switch and how desperately they are going to need an upgrade more and more as time goes on, I just really think it's a wash when you look at the stock's valuation here. I think it's fairly valued. It's not undervalued, but it's certainly not overvalued either if you're thinking long term, especially after a 35% crash. For me though, I just think that there are better options out there in the market right now that are actually undervalued rather than fairly valued with Nintendo. So if you were to ask me, well, what would it take to get you to buy Nintendo stock today? I would want the stock to just be a little bit cheaper to lower the risk. So maybe if it was down like 50%, then I would be like, okay, it's very undervalued at those prices. Or if I at least knew for sure that a upgrade console was right around the corner and I felt confidently that it will be a hit among gamers and that they will want to upgrade to it. If I had at least just one of those two things, I would say Nintendo would definitely be a buy here as a long-term investment because I still really love the company, love the business, love the brands. I think it's one of the best in the gaming market, and they have arguably the most iconic, most popular brands with Mario and Pokemon and so on. So long term, I do think that Nintendo stock is a pretty safe bet, but short to medium term, I'd kind of just rather wait and see a little bit because I feel like there's no reason to rush into it and I could just kind of wait and see if any of those things change. But anyway, that's just how I feel about Nintendo stock as of right now. It's fairly valued in my opinion. What do you guys think? I'm going to be sitting this one out, but do you own Nintendo stock? Are you thinking about buying it here? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear them down below. And of course, if I decide to buy Nintendo anytime soon, I will make sure to make a video and update you guys on it. But thank you so much for stopping by. Hope you're all doing well. Now we'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.